Welcome back to the Win with Dice podcast, a podcast featuring members of the Win with Dice team. And this week we have a special guest on who, at this point, it pretty much is a part of the Win with Dice team. I'm Calvin, and I'm joined here by Tim.
Hi, guys.
So this week we're going to get into talking about PaizoCon. A lot of stuff came up over the weekend, so we're not going to get into all of the details, but we are going to talk about the keynote and the Starfinder 2nd Edition panel. As well, if there's time at the end, we're just going to do like a brief glance at Howl of the Wild and MechaGeddon, which we've been talking about a lot in the podcast. I'm very excited to get into talking about some giant mechs fighting some giant creatures. We'll probably do a deeper dive episode in the future on the podcast, but for now, we'll just take a little look at it and then get into everything else.
Looking forward to it.
Oh yeah. There's some really cool stuff in this book that I'm really excited to talk about whenever I can. But before we get into all of that fun stuff, we have to get to the most important part of the show, the Win with Dice weekly GM tip of the week.
Yes, the Win with Dice weekly GM tip of the week, brought to you by me. So, this isn't a problem that we've had in the friendship group that you and I have, Calvin, but I've been running a game for some of the friends that I know, and we've had a bit of a problem. So, one of our friends has been a problem player, unfortunately. They don't enjoy playing RPGs themselves, but they were, they're like, yeah, we'll come to sessions, and they were making decisions that were ruining the game for other players, doing actions that people around the table weren't comfortable with, just generally ruining the whole vibe, the whole story, and no one was happy about it. And it was a sort of case where we say, oh yeah, if you're not enjoying it, don't turn up. But then they made a case to actively turn up, still come to sessions, and still ruin it for other people. We've ended up cutting that person from playing with us. So my tip is that you wouldn't take this behaviour from a stranger, and you should hold your friends to a higher standard. They're your friends, and if you want them to be your friends, you need to call them out when they're doing stuff that's not right. And maybe if you decide actually this is too much, then it's time to cut them off. Don't accept things around the table just because it's someone that you know.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you're playing RPGs, if you want that, if you want this to be a thing that you do as a hobby, if you want to do this repeatedly with the same group, or if you want to keep this group of friends together, then you have to point out when someone's doing something that's making people uncomfortable, sort of pushing people away from wanting to do this thing. Like if they're not making the effort to at least meet people there at that position where other people are comfortable with what they're doing, then that's a problem to be solved. Otherwise, the whole group is going to fall apart.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got another player who enjoys playing, they're just not necessarily good at playing. And that's different, because that's someone that we can help out, we can teach them mechanics, try and get them to be a bit less embarrassed about the role play. And that's cool, I will work with that, and we can have fun in a different way, but that is a very different thing to someone actively bringing the vibe down.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a common phrase that gets thrown around, but like, bad play is worse than no play, or not playing at all is better than having a bad game. It's worded very, it's worded better, I'm sure, but that's pretty much what it is.
Cool. Well, now that we've got the depressing stuff out of the way, let's get into the cool stuff of PaizoCon.
All right. So PaizoCon, by the time everybody's listening to this on the Wednesday, PaizoCon occurred over the past weekend. There was a whole lot of stuff going on, a whole lot of panels and events. There was also some organized play online, if y'all happen to participate in that, some of which involved some of the recent playtests coming out of Paizo. So, like I said, we're going to get into talking about the keynote and also the Starfinder 2e presentation. And later at some point, I'll just make notes of pretty much everything else, just go through all the rest of the panels and pick out any notable news stuff that people might want to be that might be interested in hearing. So up top, I do want to mention that as I was listening to these panels, I was making notes, but I also went and used some of the write-ups by a user by the name of The Magic Sword on Reddit. And in their write-ups, they linked to the American Library Association and their page on fighting censorship. So I'm going to provide that link as well below because those write-ups were very helpful in making sure I covered everything and that my notes were organized, because their notes were a bit better than mine. And again, as I said, we'll cover other stuff like the remaster, organized play, the new video game stuff. We'll cover that in a later episode. But the keynote itself. So it was opened by Eric Mona, publisher and chief creative officer at Paizo, covering some of the stuff that was going on over the weekend, like certain discounts.
Wait, there were discounts?
They were on specific books.
Man, I missed out.
They might still... They were ongoing as of... time of recording. They were ongoing as of last night. So I'm not sure. I haven't seen when they're supposed to finish. So you might get lucky. If you're listening to this in the podcast form, you definitely missed those sales.
Sorry, podcast people, but Recording Tim is looking into this now.
There was also mention of Paizo partnering with a charity, Take This, that focuses on mental health, and I'll provide a link to that charity below as well, if you are on YouTube. But pretty much the topics that are going to be covered in the keynote are Starfinder, obviously, like the MechaGeddon Adventure Path and Starfinder 2nd Edition, and a bunch of stuff for Pathfinder as well, like the new Player Core 2 book that should be out soon, Howl of the Wild, which came out the last week at the time of listening to this episode, the Battlecry playtest and the Battlecry book release in 2025, the new Tien Shaw books, like the Character Guide and the World Guide, which is coming out this year, and of course the War of Immortals event, which features the death of one of Pathfinder's main deities.
Ooh.
There's some Pathfinder Starfinder Society news, and at the end there is a big announcement that they hadn't specifically gotten into, but we will mention as part of this report.
Alright.
So, getting to the Starfinder stuff, we started off with Thurston Hillman, Managing Creative Director, and Jenny Jarzabski, Senior Developer for Starfinder. And of course, we had to start off with talking about MechaGeddon, which was just very recently released, which Jenny is always very excited about talking about mechs. And yeah, basically MechaGeddon, it's mechs versus giant monsters on the planet of Daimalco, which I think had like a short page summary in the first Starfinder core rulebook, and now is basically like the finale adventure of first edition. Players will level up both their characters and their mechs. There are some mechs which can become starships. There are some mechs that are possessed by demons, which I think is really cool. And yeah, like I said, this is basically the finale of first edition, kind of setting off Starfinder with a bang.
Man, I'm kind of terrified of the idea of mechs possessed by demons.
I'm super into it. I gotta be honest. I like the idea
super into
of
it.
like.
I'm super into it, but I'm terrified by it.
Exactly. That's how it should be. I can't help but make a Gundam reference because I've been watching Gundam Wing recently, and there's a particular mobile suit in there that like corrupts the pilot that uses it because it's just so badass, pretty much. Ooh. It's got like a really cool computer. It's a whole other thing, but I don't know. It just reminds me of that. But yeah, other than MechaGeddon, there was news on Starfinder 2nd Edition. The playtest rules will be available at Gen Con in August. You can purchase the 264-page softcover book, but the PDF will be free. It will refer to the Pathfinder 2e core rules for like the basic stuff, so the playtest itself can have more Starfinder-related details. Because, again, these two systems are going to be compatible with each other and sort of based on each other. And the core rulebook for Starfinder itself will be out in 2025. There's also going to be some playtest adventures. Some that were mentioned are these 64-page adventures. The first one being Cosmic Birthday by Jenny Jarzabski. It's a first-level adventure. Features a major setting event occurring at the start of the 2nd edition timeline. The planet Octurne, which was kind of hinted at to have something like growing and living inside of it. At the start of 2nd edition, the planet Octurne is exploding, and it's hatching something that's never been seen before. The adventure itself is going to take place on Absalom Station, in a neighborhood that's called Little Octurne. So there's obviously some connection there. The party is going to have to sort of weather the storm of this planet exploding and save the station itself. and this adventure will release alongside the playtest. And then later in the year, in October, there is a 10th level adventure called Empires Devoured, which will feature some prominent NPCs from the recent Drift Crisis book, which is actually one of the books that was on discount over the weekend, and I only very recently picked it up. This adventure, Empires Devoured, is going to focus on a war between the Vescarium and the Aslanti Empire, which is going to be a prominent part of the Starfinder 2e timeline. Mainly, this thing is for testing Starfinder components at like higher levels. Since Pathfinder already did a lot of the groundwork for testing the system itself, they don't need to do as much of like, basic stress testing, because they did that with Pathfinder. This one I'm particularly interested in because I've kind of been wanting to run in a game set in the Aslanti Empire. I've been wanting to run like a sort of Star Wars Rebels inspired thing. So I was kind of collecting like details on the Aslanti Empire that existed in first edition. So I'm looking forward to this one that will have all that stuff updated.
I'm surprised you went for Star Wars Rebels rather than Gundam, the amount you've been watching.
I mean, they do have some similar tropes, but I feel like rebellion against a space empire is so much a Star Wars thing that I can't really separate the two, or put another reference in.
That's fair. No judgment. I was just surprised.
You know what? Fair enough. And on Free RPG Day, which I'm forgetting which day that is, but there will be another adventure called... it's June 22nd.
Oh, sweet.
There will be an adventure called Second Contact, which features ferrofluid oozes, glass serpents, laser wolves, and other creatures. Like a Squawk's companion. Squawk's came out... I forget which book that was in. It was in... I think it was like last year or the year previous. But it was like a mixture between a squirrel and a fox, really. It's a little furry companion that you could have. And all of those are going to be compatible with Pathfinder 2nd Edition.
Nice.
I'm kind of curious how a ferrofluid ooze would react in like a Pathfinder fantasy setting where so many characters have metal armor.
Man, I don't even know.
I think that would be interesting to see. And then there's also going to be a handful of short playtest adventures to be released at Gen Con, which we will get into when we talk about the Starfinder panel itself. So that's the Starfinder stuff. And then we move on to the Pathfinder stuff. The Pathfinder section being introduced by Jason Bullman, Director of Game Design. And of course, as people already know, having to move from the OGL to the Orc license sort of encouraged a lot of remaster stuff. So that's part of why there's new Player Core books coming out and things like that. So the upcoming Player Core 2 book is just it's going to round out some of the options that were already available by the time the remaster happened, and there will be classes that get some significant changes. And at that point, Logan Bonner, Pathfinder lead designer, sort of gave a list of what all those changes would be, or rather what's in the book itself. So some Ancestries, the Catfolk, Hobgoblin, Kolo, which is the Knoll, the Kobold, Lizardfolk, Ratfolk, Tengu, and the Tripkey, which was previously known as the Gripply, like these little frog dudes. You have your versatile heritages, like your Dampier and Duskwalker, which were already available, but you also have the new Dragonblood, which is a new heritage with draconic influence. They showed the example of an arcane Dragonblood character, and apparently it's going to be very flexible, and with the dragon stuff we were looking at in the Monster Core book, there's going to be obviously like a whole lot of options there. The classes in the book will be the Alchemist, Barbarian, Champion, Investigator, Monk, Oracle, Sorcerer, and Swashbuckler. So we finally get our Barb and our Champ back. And the Alchemist, Champion, and Oracle are the classes that are going to have some of the more significant changes. It was also specifically pointed out, and I thought it was interesting, that the previously released errata and stuff like that, like some previously released information for those classes, it was more focused on getting current characters to be playable in the remaster as fast as possible. But now these books are going to have, the same sort of changes that the last Player Core book had, just kind of revamping them to emphasize the play experience a bit more.
I can't speak to Champion or Oracle, but from what I've seen of The Alchemist, I think that did need an overhaul. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that's going to work in future.
Yeah, I hope we get some sort of preview on The Alchemists. It might have come up in the Remaster panel, actually. So if it is, be sure to talk about it in the future. But it would be nice to see like a bit of a preview on those. And then from there, we went to talking about playtests. Michael Sayer, design manager, was talking about some of the playtest stuff. Previously, there was the playtest for the Exemplar and the Animist, which will have, new items. The Animist itself had some subclasses that were completely revamped from player feedback. The Battlecry playtest, which came out recently and featured the Commander and the Guardian, it actually set some records with regards to how much it was downloaded. Apparently, the Battlecry playtest surpassed the original Pathfinder 2nd Edition playtest in just 4 days.
Wow. Big news.
Yeah. So clearly people are into those classes. I do think they're pretty cool. I didn't expect them to be like that much more popular than the original playtest. So the playtest itself for Battlecry is going to run until June 21st. And there were some society games that were using some of the playtest stuff. So definitely if you're out there, you want to get your feedback in for those classes, you have about a month left to do so. Up next was Howl of the Wild. And this was discussed by James Case, senior designer on rules and lore at Paizo, and Simone D. Sal, senior editor at Paizo. This one we might talk about a bit more in the future, but it has a focus on animals and the natural world. It's described as being written as like a mix between an adventure story and a scientific study. And in case we don't get too deep into the details later, I do want to mention that it does come with a bunch of new ancestries. You have your Athamaru, who are like these fish-like humanoids. Awakened animals, which are just normal creatures that gain sort of sapience. You have centaurs, which I'm very excited about because I really want to finally make my centaur gunslinger. You have your merfolk, your aquatic half-humans, obviously. You have your minotaurs, and you have your circi, which are like an insectile ancestry that emerges from the subterranean darklands.
Oh.
Yeah, all really cool stuff.
And we'll be able to mix that with Starfinder when 2E is finally out as well.
Exactly.
I want my insect aliens.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, there's like you're gonna have like a bunch of insectile options for Starfinder.
I suppose that probably exists already, doesn't it? I haven't played Starfinder yet. I will do.
There are several, but I mean,
we'll leave that for late after the podcast. Let's focus on what people want right now. The meat of PaizoCon.
But a space mermaid would be super cool, and they have like robot legs. Okay, we'll come back to that.
Look, man, I'm still on Laser Wolves from several months ago, so.
So yeah. Additionally, at the keynote, they talked about the new Tien books. James Case again, and Eleanor Farron, senior developer and development lead for the Tien books. Specifically, the World Guide and Character Guide. The World Guide came out in April, and it had lore, settings, countries, cultures, deities, monsters, and more, like a whole bunch of stuff for Tien itself, updated for the current timeline after other previous Pathfinder adventures that happened. And the Character Guide will be out in August, and it will have even more ancestries, 6 more ancestries, and further player options to create a character with a background involving Tien Sha, which is, as they described, it's just sort of inspired by Asian fantasy. It has a very large author pool for both books, with people who have different backgrounds and experience and expertise. I'll have a link to the Tien Sha book below as well, for people to go check out, because it has a very long author list. So yeah, I want to make sure to shout that out. And up next is War of Immortals, the big ol' event. There was a bunch of people covering this. Michael Sayer, Mark Moreland, Luis Loza, James Jacobs, and John Compton. All familiar names for people who have been keeping up with Paizo stuff. But yeah, War of Immortals, again, this is the adventure that features the death of a Pathfinder deity, the death of Gorum, as we discussed a few weeks ago. The cover of the book, which I'll throw an image up, it features an event partway through the book, where if in the cover it has the new Animist and Exemplar iconic characters, and they're facing Zuzuriel, the Apocalypse Rider of War, which sounds cool. I don't know what that means, but it sounds really cool.
If that is not sort of like the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, then I don't know what that is. That's the only thing I can think.
I think that's what they're going for, but might have to get the adventure to see like who the other three are. There is new art featuring the death of Gorum and the beginning of the Godsrain event. You can actually see like Gorum's blood starting to like rain down, empowering some characters and perhaps upsetting the balance of power in Golarion. And there are also new mythic rules, including a calling, which every character playing in War of Immortals gets a calling, which acts sort of like a free archetype. Basically a free set of feats that you can add on to your character. They give you access to mythic feats and mythic proficiencies, which is a proficiency level higher than legendary. So that's probably going to be a proficiency of like 10 plus level, I think.
Okay.
Basically auto success on a roll. And then at higher levels, you can unlock mythic destinies. The example that was given is Prophesied Monarch, so someone who's destined to become some sort of leader or ruler, but it can also be interpreted in different ways. So you could be a king with a bunch of knights, or you could be a pirate with like a large loyal crew.
I wonder how people will use that in their own games to dish out bad prophecies.
That would be interesting. Like if you have a prophecy of someone maybe becoming a villain of sorts, or doing something like harmful to themselves or others, or causing some sort of destruction, maybe.
Yeah, maybe, or maybe like, oh, you're fated for this terrible prophecy either, and you've got to try and fight it.
Yeah, that would be cool. Oh man, see, you've got me wanting to play more new characters now, but that would be very cool. Specifically trying to fight against it. I like that there's, mechanical options for this sort of thing now. In addition, there are mythic monsters that are meant to be more powerful than typical monsters. There's no change to the actual, math of creatures at those levels, but they have abilities that, exist outside of the math. The specific example that was given was an immortal trickster character that whenever it's killed, it can switch places with any fox, raven, or coyote within a certain distance. So it is very hard to kill.
That's definitely the kind of god or immortal where you need to plan ahead.
Yeah. You have to be, very far from a zoo or whatever. Just go out into the water.
Dimension door him into space!
Ooh. Perfect. Yeah, I think that's gonna be that's just gonna be a really cool boss fight to do. I mean, I'm sure this book is gonna have a bunch of stuff that would be cool on its own, so I think it'll be an interesting adventure. But yeah, continuing in the War of Immortals stuff, we have Leanne Merciel, who wrote the story for the War of Immortals book, and that story continues in the novels, in the Godsrain novel that'll be out later this year, and also had contributed a mythic kaiju which players can fight against. So, looking forward to that as well. The novel Godsrain, it's not required for reading the War of Immortals book and vice versa. They're not reliant on each other, but it does feature the iconic characters facing a new spawn of Rovagug. The name that I heard was Varix that was, so whatever that means, they are going to be fighting that character. And it also features the death of a god and how Rovagug's prison is affected. This is all, of course, Pathfinder lore stuff, which I'm sure every listener already knows.
Yeah, totally. It's not like, your podcast host and guest for today have no idea because we're totally in on this.
Yeah. um, they also did specifically mention that they're sort of treating these novels a bit differently. Normally, the novels would be sort of smaller stories that don't affect like the overall status quo of the game, because they didn't want those characters to sort of override what players would do in their individual campaigns. But this book is going to feature some major settings for the campaign, just because of everything that it's covering, which is apparently something that people had been asking for. So I'm hoping people enjoy it. So yeah, the Godsrain book is out in November, with a couple of prologue ebooks coming out, including one that collects all the Godsrain prophecies, those blog posts that were on the Paizo site for, I think they did 10 of them, I think. And yeah, those were pretty interesting. I'm not sure if you had seen those, but they were like basically alternate timelines of what would happen if different deities died.
Ooh.
So it was like, what if Pharasma died? What if Rovagug died?
Wait, what if Pharasma died? Does that mean death is dead and like everyone just is immortal in their own way now? Or like it's a state of undying? Oh, I gotta go read that.
Yeah, you should. You know what? You go read it.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to.
Because that was one of the more interesting ones to me. So yeah, definitely go read that. And in addition, there are some upcoming standalone adventures that tie into War of Immortals. I believe they're all 128 pages. If I'm mistaken, then someone can correct me. The first one being Pray for Death, Pray with an E, where the party plays as evil characters. You play as Red Mantis assassins that sort of get caught up in a conspiracy. And this is an adventure from 14th to 18th level. Gorham's death is on screen in this adventure. There weren't any specifics as to what that means, but I assume that you actually, you witness it.
I mean, if you're a party of assassins, did these people kill God?
I mean, that's a possibility, but I mean, it is a 14th to 18th level adventure.
And they get caught in a conspiracy? Man, I think we've solved it right there.
I mean, that it's distinctly possible that if you have a party of 18th level assassins, your target is a god. I mean, that's who you'd send.
Well, we're gonna have to play it and find out.
True. There is Curtain Call, a 3-part adventure path. It is from 11th to 20th level. The titles from the different parts are Stage Fright by Richard Pett, Singer Stalker Skinsaw Man by Kendra Lee Speedling, and Bring the House Down by Sen HHS, who have also done other stuff with Pathfinder and Paizo before. Apparently, you can play through this whole thing, or almost the whole thing, without rolling initiative, but there are still a lot of fights that you can get into. And I kind of like the idea of this one. It's a bit funny. Basically, this director approaches the player party to do an opera on their past adventuring lives. So basically, whatever happened to them from 1st to 10th level. But partway through, the Godsrain event happens. So kind of interrupts your attempts to put on this fun little show.
Oh my goodness. That's a wonderful combination of silly and stupid.
Yeah, exactly. Like I would play through a campaign to 10th level just to do this.
Yeah, I would too.
What else do we have? We also have Triumph of the Tusk, which is a storyline that takes place after the Godsrain event. And it heavily features orcs and the Belkzen region. Artix, the white-haired, who I guess is the leader in this region, is inviting a bunch of dignitaries and trying to open up Belkzen to the wider world. Those dignitaries will be the players or who sends the players in. There's also going to be some impact on like half the orc pantheon. They were described as getting bonked, so I'm not sure all of them will make it out of this alive. Or at least out of War of Immortals alive. But one of the main things about it is that it's also going to change how orcs are seen in the setting going forward. Especially because it's specifically about like opening up diplomacy in orcish regions.
So how are orcs seen at the minute? Because I know Paizo had a whole change about how they dealt with goblins. Is this a similar thing that's now happening with orcs, or has that happened and then this is yet another change?
I feel like that's kind of like happened already. I mean, I guess to be fair, like I'm just now playing Rise of the Rune Lord, so I'm seeing more of the earlier depictions of goblins. So there might be some earlier stuff with regards to orcs that I wasn't really familiar with. I mean, especially like at this point, I feel like the depiction of orcs has been pretty different. So maybe this just might be more of like putting it all together in one book, I guess, instead of just like things that occur in different adventure paths or different stories.
Yeah, that would make sense.
And rounding out the War of Immortals books is Lost Omens Divine Mysteries. And we had talked about this on the podcast before. This is basically like where all the deities are going to be at after War of Immortals, just basically summarizing the new situation, including the updates to the core deities, since Erasni is going to be one of those core deities. It's going to include some that have been, like, some that are never before seen, specifically a god of familiars and witches, which sounds kind of fun. Updates to like categories of deities, new groupings of deities, and the ability for classes like rogues or fighters, classes that aren't like divine related, to access divine abilities. So yeah, could be a bit of fun to have more. I mean, there's going to be a ton of more character options and everything. So.
Oh sure.
And then after the War of Immortals stuff, we got into organized play. Alex Speedell, Organized Play Coordinator, Jessica Catalan, Senior Developer and Head of Starfinder Society, and Shay Snow, Developer in the Pathfinder Society team, were there to talk about it. There is an Organized Play panel, so there's going to be more details and stuff there. But for now, there is Year 7 of Starfinder Society, Year of Era's End. This is going to be the last season to use the Starfinder First Edition rules. Next year, they'll get into 2nd Edition. So, since this is the end, it's going to be wrapping up a bunch of storylines. And then Pathfinder Society Year 6, Year of Immortal Influence, is now fully under the Remaster rules. And the upcoming season will have some connections to War of Immortals and Godsrain and all that stuff. Next in the keynote was covering all the digital stuff with Andrew White, the digital products lead. Basically talking about tokens and stuff that are going to be, some tokens and stuff that are going to be available. The token set from Monster Core, it'll have support for dynamic token frames, which is a feature on Foundry that I didn't know of, but apparently, like, say if something takes damage or gets healed and stuff like that, like, it can dynamically change a frame around the token.
Well, that's another thing we need to look into once we stop recording.
Right? I don't know if this is going to be a new feature coming out soon or if it already exists, but it does sound cool. And all the tokens that are going to be released for the Monster Core book are going to support that. The Starfinder playtest in August is going to be Foundry compatible, which is very, very, very cool. It is going to be compatible with the existing Pathfinder 2nd Edition Foundry module, as well as support for the previously mentioned playtest adventures. And there's also going to be some new music by Michael Gelfi Studios to go along with the adventure paths. I believe there's going to be more mention of the music in a different panel, so if I find more on that, I'll talk about it more. But yeah, I wouldn't mind having some more background music to play with.
Nah, I hope it's not background music. I hope it's like actively singing about, you know, the Demon Lord cometh or whatever else is like happening right that instant. I want some
cool.
full-on self-aware Alan Wake style rock group singing in that.
Oh, okay, that does sound. You know what? That is a much better idea.
I mean that's not what we'll get, but that would be nice.
I'm hip. I'm into it. After that, we had the community and licensing part of the keynote, which featured Mark Moreland, Director of Brand Strategy, and John Morgatini, Community and Social Media Specialist. So they were just talking about things going on with the community, in particular highlighting the moderators on like Discord and Reddit and different forums, and the volunteers on sites like Archives of Nethys and on Foundry as well. Those volunteers on Nethys and on Foundry have basically been saving our games for years, so shout out to them.
Absolutely, yeah. Just you know, in the highly unlikely chance that you're listening, thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, so much of our online play wouldn't be able to happen without those things. So, also there was just mention of the large amount of goodwill and stuff towards Paizo during 2023, after things were a bit rough with the OGL, which we don't have to go into, but it's pretty obvious there was a lot of goodwill towards Paizo during that time. And as well, there was just mention of Pathfinder Infinite and Starfinder Infinite. That community is growing. It's where people can create their own content and stuff under the Paizo IP, so their own adventures, their own editions, their own character options and stuff like that. I haven't done too deep of a dive on it, but I have seen glimpses of some cool character options and stuff, so yeah, I think it's worth checking out if you want to expand your Pathfinder or Starfinder games. And then we concluded with Jason Bowman and Joe Piscini, lead designer on games, talking about the big announcement that they were saving, which is Pathfinder Quest, a co-op adventure board game for 1 to 4 players. Sort of taking your group on an epic campaign through Dark Moon Vale. There is a link to the Backer Kit page, so if you want to put your email there, get notified when the game is ready to be announced, when the Kickstarter campaign is ready, you can check that out. I'll include the link below as well. It's quite a while from now that it'll be announced, but I'm sure we'll see more details by Gen Con or something.
Interesting stuff.
And yeah, that was the entire keynote. Yeah, a lot of stuff was announced. There's a bunch of things that were revealed, some details and stuff that we didn't have before. A whole lot of things to look forward to over the next year. I'm probably going to get this board game, but I'm very excited for Starfinder 2nd Edition. That's kind of my main thing at the moment.
Yeah, I think just making it integrated or swappable. I mean, we've said this before, but that's just gonna it's gonna bring so much to the table anyway. But it's gonna give players and homebrew GMs so much more to work with, and I'm just really excited to see all of that side of things, not just the stuff that Paizo's pushing out.
Yeah, especially with something like the Pathfinder and Starfinder Infinite pages. Once those two systems are compatible, I want to see what people sort of bring to the table there.
Yeah.
Alright, so let's get to talking about some Starfinder stuff. I'll probably go through this a bit quicker, but so for Starfinder, I kind of sorted things by subject more than the order that things were talked about in. But yeah, for Starfinder 2nd Edition, there was of course discussion on different mini game rule systems like Starship Combat and Mech Combat. There wasn't much to reveal on Mech Combat, just that it's definitely in development. Because again, Jenny loves talking about mechs. But for Starship Combat, there was conversation of it leaning, trying to strike that balance between the cinematic Starship Combat, while also having those rules for people who wanted to build their own ships and everything. Wanting to make it easier to run sort of impromptu Starship Combat without prep, which definitely would be very helpful because I was not able to do that. And also specifically, as they're looking at how people play current Starship Combat, more opportunities for people other than the pilot to move the ship, because that's kind of the pilot's job and no one else's sort of thing. Which I personally don't mind, just because I like the sort of team dynamic of that, but I can see people maybe wanting to be involved in that or not wanting to be the only one who has to do it.
I can certainly see there being opportunities if the pilot has to do something else and maybe needs either a co-pilot or for plot reasons, the pilot's out of action and someone else needs to jump in. I mean, think the Airplane movie, but in space.
Yeah, pretty much that. I gotta watch that again. It's been forever. So, in addition, there was some conversation on classes. There was an image of the layout for the operative class, which showed sort of the updated look for the book, which sort of leans a bit more from the tech and more into like the fantasy stuff. The word whimsy came up specifically. But comparing the two, like it does look a bit more, I guess, magical in a way. In addition, on the page, there are mentions of things like you could zoom in and probably glean some information. There are things like simple, martial, and advanced guns, sort of adding on to the Pathfinder weapon proficiencies. And the operative class itself is being reevaluated, because before it was the one that was kind of like all-around skilled and really good at single target damage, but that's kind of what the rogue does. So this one's a bit more focused on specializing on certain skills and being an expert marksman.
You just looking forward to being Commander Shepard again?
I mean, you're not wrong. Yeah, because I do love playing Shepard as a sniper. So yeah, pretty much.
No, it's a good way. That was no judgment. That was full respect for the commitment to it. It's really well done.
Oh no, absolutely. Yeah, I'm curious what that's going to end up being, because again, like these things have to fit with the existing Pathfinder classes. So things like the Envoy that we talked about a while ago, like they're trying to avoid the same overlap that existed.
Yeah, I definitely don't feel like they're just redoing something that already exists here. This definitely feels like its own thing, and I'm looking forward to seeing it, flourish.
Mm-hmm. And I kind of feel like now you can play like original flavor operative as a rogue in Starfinder 2nd Edition. Like if you play a Pathfinder rogue, you kind of have something very similar to that then. Okay. Especially because the operative, they used to have their own thing that would get people like flat-footed, or I guess off guard now. Mm-hmm. There's also mention of the Witch Warper class, which is this class that like has effects on reality and things like that, including some of the possible new mechanics for it, which I'm sure you will hear more about in the future.
So this is Paizo Starfinder answer to Doctor Strange.
It might be, now that it's being shifted a bit, especially from the way they were describing it. The feats, the feats themselves, there are a bunch that are like, they're all made for Starfinder, but some of them, they can work with both systems. Like, apparently, like, over half of them could work in Pathfinder with very minimal adjustment. Although there are, of course, some that are, like, specifically referencing, like, the infosphere and things like that. There's going to be 64 new feats within the book. There's some for, like, diving for cover, feigning death, shooting while prone, and there's some that you can use for downtime activities, like how you can earn an income in Pathfinder. You can do the same in Starfinder, but with things like creating an app and then making an income based off of that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Just some mentions of equipment. The equipment page that they showed, it did show some of the equipment was marked with like upgrade 4 or upgrade plus and stuff like that. Which people were asking about. Those are basically just like item levels to make it easier to scale items. Sort of simplify that process. We didn't see the details on it, but I guess it's just going to be something in the game as well. There's going to be 126 spells in the book, which we saw glimpses of a few of them. There was mention of a holographic memory spell that was inspired by Horizon Zero Dawn. Mention of a 10th level spell called New Game, which I don't know what that means, but it was apparently pretty powerful. And then there was discussion of, didn't get the name, but there was discussion of a spell that was apparently supposed to do infinite damage, but it's been scaled down to like over 9,000 damage. I have no idea what that conversation was about, and I'm not going to know until I see the playtest book, but I'm looking forward to the over 9,000 spell. And then, yeah, as mentioned before, there are going to be some adventures for Starfinder 2nd Edition. Cosmic Birthday, which we mentioned before, it's going to feature a creature they call it a midwife, this extraplanar outsider that's going to appear at the birth of this planet-sized creature as it destroys Octurne. Empires Devoured, which we mentioned before, this featuring this war between the Veskarium and the Aslanti. In this panel, it was revealed that it will feature the Sahedron Guard, which references the Sahedron, which is this 7-pointed magical artifact and symbol from Pathfinder Ancient History. I didn't read too deep into it because it apparently involves Rise of the Rune Lords, and I kind of didn't want to spoil too much of that for myself. But that's something to do with Pathfinder's old history. And it also involves hazards that the players have to deal with, and those hazards allow various checks to overcome them, such as, if you want, your character can use a religion check to overcome a hazard, which basically involves them praying to a deity to make whatever is happening stop. Which, that's fun. I would allow that at a table. And then lastly, there are the playtest scenarios. 2 are going to be available at the playtest release. They're all designed for 2-hour play. There's Shards of the Glass Planet, which is a low-level adventure. It Came from the Vast is a 5th level horror scenario. Wheel of Monsters, a 10th level tactical combat scenario themed around a game show. And Rescue at Shimmerstone Mine, a 15th level Magitech dungeon delve and rescue mission. And there's going to be pre-gens at 1st and 5th level, but not at 10th and 15th, so players will have to sort of make their own characters at those levels and obviously, test the game, give feedback, that sort of thing. And that is all the PaizoCon stuff that I kind of wanted to cover this week. It was quite a lot. Tim, anything sort of standing out to you in the Starfinder stuff?
Well, there is one thing, and I think it's very important because, trying to go through this, there is one item in the notes that I think you missed, which is the final spell. And I think it's very important that your listeners are aware that this exists, or will exist.
Yes. I don't remember if you got the name of the spell. You got the description of a spell. That the intent of it is to manipulate the target's genetic code, and it turns them into a crab.
That's carcinization, fools! Everything returns to crab.
Yes, return to crab. But is it going to be helpful or harmful? Because I don't know. It could go both ways.
It's simultaneously both. Like, you're fighting a dude, oh no, he's got big evil wizard spells that glitch our spaceship. He's gonna become a crab now, and now you've got Space Crab. Space Crab gonna pinch your ship.
Yeah, oh man, what if you transform some sort of space creature into a crab, and it's like a big crab in space, and it's coming for you still.
Look, there is no bad way of including this. This is the greatest spell that I've ever heard of in anything.
Yeah, because you know what? Because it's going to be compatible with Pathfinder, so yeah, we can just use it.
Yes!
We can just use it in a game.
Why does anyone want the wish spell? We want Return to Crab.
What else would you do with a wish spell anyways?
Oh, you're right. You're right.
Yeah. There's going to be a lot of very fun, very silly stuff in that book. I feel like Starfinder leans into silly a bit more than Pathfinder sometimes does. So I'm sure there's going to be a bunch more things like that. But yeah, that is the PaizoCon stuff. Briefly, I do want to take a look at MechaGeddon and Howl of the Wild. I think we'll go into like a deeper detailed dive on them at a later time. But as for Howl of the Wild, and we did mention the possible ancestries that exist, but there are more things you can get there. They have special rules for playing large player characters, tiny player characters, aquatic or flying player characters, and even characters that you are able to ride, since there are centaurs there. So if your party is such that you have that connection that you, as a centaur, would allow someone to ride on your back, they have rules for that sort of thing. Different archetypes, different spells, different creatures, different graphs that you can apply to creatures to change them. Gear, siege weapons, whole bunch of stuff that I do want to get into, but will probably be at a later time. Oh, and dinosaurs as well. Cannot forget those.
Don't we already have dinosaurs?
There are more dinosaurs.
Oh yeah. Get dinosaurs and grabs, folks. What more do you want?
Exactly. What else could you possibly need? But lastly, I did want to mention MechaGeddon. We'll do a deep dive into this book at some point. But it is a book that's set on the planet Daimalko, which is under siege by these massive kaiju monsters called Colossi. And it's defended by mech pilots who protect sort of the remaining populace. So if
is this Pacific Rim in Starfinder?
It's basically Pacific Rim and Starfinder.
Yes.
Yeah, if you've ever wanted to pilot your own laser-powered giant smasher, your heavy metal kaiju crasher, whatever you want to call it, your thunder striking monster thrasher, this is where you would do it. Again, this adventure is going to be the big finale of first edition, and yeah, it all sounds very, very cool.
I love it.
Yeah, I do want to talk about it more. I just didn't want to make like a super long episode. So we'll probably cover it in more detail later, but I will say that the adventure itself, it starts at 3rd level. Players will start with a mech, and you'll be part of the new Valor Defense Force. You'll just basically start off completing your training to become Huzcar, which is what they refer to the pilots as. And you'll have your own Valco, which is what the mechs are. There's a bunch of different mech frames and parts that sort of use the mech combat rules that were in the Tech Revolution book. And players are, of course, encouraged to come up with their own call signs, their own team name. The players could be from Daimalko and going through that training, or they could be off-worlders who want to receive mech training, or they just want to see these big creatures up close. And there is some stuff in this book that I really wanted to talk about. I was on the fence about mentioning it because some of it is spoiler stuff, but there are, like, corrupted machines, there are mecha demons, and there is a certain player option that specifically refers to stuff that happens towards the end of the adventure. But, how can I word this in the vaguest way possible? If you don't just want to fight against Colossi, there might be something interesting in there for you.
No.
There might be an interesting player option in there.
Ooh.
There might be a thing that specifically says, this might unbalance the game for the rest of the party, so be cautious when you use it.
Well, folks, that's a taster. I'm sure Calvin will go into that in more detail in a future podcast. Hit that subscribe button.
Yeah. I think we'll save details on these two books for separate episodes. Because I did really like going into the Rage of Elements book, so I kind of want to do that with the Howl of the Wild book. I think that'll be pretty fun. Yeah,
it sounds like it deserves its own, proper in-depth discussion.
And yeah, of course, MechaGeddon. I actually really also like, one more thing I want to say about MechaGeddon is it has a collection of, like, side jobs in the adventure. Things that you can do with, like, maybe you don't have your whole group here, or you just want to insert something into the story at a certain point. They have, like, a bunch of smaller stuff you can do in mechs that aren't part of the main adventure, and I really like that idea. So I just wanted to shout that out.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, we'll talk about those in more detail in the future. But I think that's going to do it for the episode for now. Tim, thanks a ton for hanging out.
No, thank you for having me, and I will leave it a while until the next one so that you can't say that I'm almost a member of the crew, because then I have to do work to contribute.
No, it's too late. You're in the team now.
You're gonna have to go to meetings and business
Part of the
reviews.
cast, part of the crew.
No, thank you very much for having me. On a serious note, it's always fun to join in with you guys, and I'll see folks when we talk about whatever's we need to talk about next.
Yeah, I mean, we'll probably have you back on when we finish talking about the Aftermath campaign. Or, actually, I mean, I might maybe drag you and everyone else on when we talk about the finale of the Quest-Seer campaign.
That is an episode to look forward to, and it was something that we really enjoyed playing. So yeah, once again, thank you for running that all these years. It was phenomenal ending that you put for us.
I'm so glad everybody enjoyed that, and yeah, we will have to talk about it at some point in the future, because I've been thinking some thoughts on it as a finale, and some things that sort of came together in a way that I didn't expect, and I realized that I apparently have some certain tropes that I really like. But that's a whole future thing. So yeah, thanks a ton, everybody out there, for swinging by and listening to this episode of the podcast. If you want to check out more of our stuff, where we talk about more Pathfinder and Starfinder and Lancer RPG and everything else in between, there's a bunch of previous episodes you can check out. Again, the podcast is on Spotify now, which I'm very, very happy with. But if you don't want to use Spotify, we're on a bunch of other services. We're on iRadio, I think. We have the RSS feed available if you just want to check that out. If you want to hook that up to whatever service you need. We're on Apple Podcasts. I don't think Google Podcasts is around anymore, but we were on that. So we're on a bunch of stuff. Also on the channel are the live gaming streams. There are some upcoming schedule changes, which I will make posts about going forward, but planning to wrap up Mass Effect Andromeda sometime soon. Probably this week, but we'll see how the weekend goes. Other than that, I want to shout out all the people that are linked below. If you're on YouTube, if you're into the Lancer RPG, there's a bunch of really awesome writers and creators linked below, as well as Soar, which is by Eld, who we had on the show a while back. In addition, I want to mention the Untold Stories project, where I'm at on Wednesdays in the Freedom League Dark game. Check them out. Check out their Something in the Dark series that's going on Tuesdays. And we'll be playing some Baldur's Gate 3 at some point in the future. But that's all I've got for now. Tim, anything else you want to mention before we head out of here?
Nothing that we haven't discussed already. I think you're good to hit people with the outro.
Alright. Well, for all of our mech piloting heroes out there, just remember to keep on winning with dice, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.